All right, what's up, everyone? Adam Gelman here. I've got a great panel of people to talk about player collecting in WWE. We've been sort of hyping this on Twitter for a while now, and I'm very excited to be joined by some new voices to sort of the group discussions I've been hosting over the last few months. And I always get excited when we get to talk to new people because they bring such a fresh perspective a lot of times. I know you've probably seen them on other videos and you've seen them all over Twitter, so they're probably not unfamiliar to you, but they may be sort of unfamiliar as a group to sort of all contribute at once. So let's get some introductions here. I am Adam Gelman. I am at WWE Gelman on Instagram. I am at SC Uncensored on Twitter. You can follow me there. I'm going to kick it over to Chris, and he can introduce himself, and then we'll go around to everybody else so we can see who's here and get some feedback on kind of what and get this discussion started here. Chris?
Sounds good. I'm Chris Brancato, Chris_Brancato on Twitter, and Boomerang Arrows on Instagram. I kind of just use at this point as a extra means of communication. It was more targeted on my comic book collecting side of things, so I just use that now sort of as an extra tool to communicate with people. But mostly I'm on Twitter at Chris_Brancato.
Awesome. Dave?
Hi, I'm David Wright. I am LongFlyBall on Twitter, and that's pretty much where I mostly spend home. I do have a Instagram account, but beyond setup, I've never really touched it. Someday I'll get to it. But yeah, I've been a long time collector. I've worked in peripherally. I've worked in the hobby, done some podcasts, did a weekly radio show, and now I'm just a curmudgeonly collector that snarks on Twitter when somebody makes it easy.
Nice. And my mortal enemy, Mr. Alvis, how are you, sir? What's going on, my man?
I am good. Thanks for inviting me on. I think this is gonna be a lot of fun. So my name's Matt, for people who don't know, otherwise known as WWEPrizmCollector on Twitter and Instagram. I'm also in some of the Facebook groups, so you could find me there. Just my regular name, which is Matt. And I'm kind of new to wrestling cards. I started collecting earlier this year, just before the release of Prism. And I started collecting just after getting back into wrestling, period, in February of this year, after really not watching much wrestling at all since, the Attitude Era. So over 20 years, I just turned it on one February or a day in February, and I was, bored and never stopped watching. I don't think I've missed a Raw or SmackDown since. So, and shortly after that, got into wrestling cards, and it's just been a blast getting to know people. And yeah, look forward to the discussion we're going to have tonight.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. And I think the reason I wanted to have Matt on, other than to beat him up, was because he's a newer collector and because he's sort of approached this very similarly to sort of the topic that we're discussing today, which is like focusing on a single player, or in this case, a single wrestler. I say player collecting because that's really the way that it's thought of in the mainstream hobby. But I mean, like, Matt, given that this is kind of new to you, generally speaking, like, what is your overall take on sort of the way people collect in WWE versus kind of the way that you've seen it? Because I know you're not a newbie to the hobby in general. You may just be new to wrestling collecting. So kind of what's been your take? And then we'll go around and kind of get everybody's opinion as well. Because I think this is really the interesting topic, is like no one really expects to come into wrestling and see it the way it is. And there's sort of like this split, and I'm curious what your experience has been so far.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think the one thing that stands out, and a lot of people have commented on this, I've heard people comment on this, which is that wrestling collectors are just passionate. And I think that leads to, people becoming player collectors because they're passionate about, the people they watch, the superstars they enjoy. They've collected other memorabilia, whether it's wrestling figures and things like that. So it's not just wrestling cards. I mean, people collect, man, you could collect wrestling chairs. Believe me, I've looked at that on eBay. Those are awesome. And so I think people are just really passionate in the community, particularly people who have been here before the boom of cards in general and collectibles in general. And so, that's really stood out to me. And it is really, we're talking about super collecting, and that is really the thing that has stood out to me, is that there are a lot of people who are passionate about particular superstars or wrestlers, and that makes sense. Wrestling's not really a team sport. You have factions, but you're going to gravitate towards maybe one person, two or three different people, and that's a way to sort of build your collection out around those people. So that stuck out to me, and that is probably what led me down this path to becoming, a super collector or super collecting. And maybe we'll define what that even means at some point.
We will. We'll get there.
Yeah. So that's been my take. But really just the passion people have for, cards and wrestling in general. That's part of what's made it so fun.
Yeah, I got to agree with you. And it was really interesting for me coming in too, because I came from the stick and ball sports myself. So I grew up collecting baseball and football. Chris, have you had a little bit of a different experience? I know you've been very active within the community as well. Talk to me about kind of if your experience maybe is the same or different. What's been your sort of take on things here?
Sure. I'll give a little background on my collecting journey, and then I'll kind of tie it into my opinion of where things stand with wrestling cards now. So basically, I started out collecting comics for a while, years ago. I got really heavy into that, and then my interest kind of waned in it. I still love the art of comics. I still read comics and consume it in that way. But in terms of collecting comics, it started to get almost a little stale for me, because it pretty much was, what I did was I collected Spider-Man. I collected the original Spider-Mans, and I had issues 1 through 100. It was a great accomplishment. I loved going through that journey, but once I got those issues, it was done. You didn't have things like parallels. You didn't have things like, it was very specific and goal-driven, and you could accomplish it if you have the means to, and then you're done, and you go on to the next thing. And I think that side of things kind of bored me over time. And simultaneously at the same time, coincidentally, literally 2 weeks before COVID started, I sold my whole comic collection, which gave me funds to shift. And at that time, simultaneously, I was getting into cards, coincidentally, right before the COVID boom. And I gravitated to the traditional stuff. I gravitated to basketball first and baseball. And a lot of what I experienced in basketball was I can maybe get the cool cards that I wanted, but it had to be of a B-list player. It had to be of a super young guy that, it's just prospect. That's the whole thing. And, I was lusting over these.
I've been there, man.
I've been
there. It's crazy.
Yeah, I was lusting over these other cards that just were, for me, just completely out of reach. And then wrestling, CM Punk is what brought me back to wrestling. Basically, when he came back, I like Matt. I grew up during the Attitude Era. That was my everything. A little bit before then as well, but then after the Attitude Era, I went to high school, and wrestling fell behind for a while. Then I got into CM Punk, then I fell out of it again, then I got back into it once CM Punk came back. At the same time, I got into wrestling cards, and unfortunately, CM Punk's cards aren't the most aesthetically pleasing. So it opened my eyes to other things, which led me to Seth Rollins, because Seth Rollins was one person that I always watched in those off years. I got together with friends. We would watch the Big Four. We would mock it. We would enjoy little things about it. And Seth Rollins was always that one constant who I didn't know much about, but he always caught my attention. So that's what brought me into him. And then to get back onto what we were discussing, what I came to really enjoy about the wrestling card community is it was that tight-knit community that people like to romanticize and talk about. And it was super cool to have people look out for you, or have people reach out to you or think of you when you're after a specific card. And that was something I didn't experience in the big bad world of, mainstream
Yeah, it
sports.
doesn't happen like that. It's crazy because like you look at this from the perspective of like, hey, when we're in basketball or football or stuff, it's so competitive. People just pile on to a very specific, and they all want to win. Like, I want to win. And
Yeah.
there's very little community aspect or help or anything that goes on. I mean, like, I think we've all kind of been there, right?
Yep. And so
yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, and so at this point now, we could talk about this conversation for a while. But it feels like we're at a crossroads point now where things are sort of getting bigger or on the cusp of getting bigger. And there's some people that are kind of dragging their heels and not all on board, and then there's others that are like, bring it on. And that's kind of where I fall, maybe because I'm newer to it, but I find it to be, I think it's just going up from here, personally.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think like that's always been the challenge, because I've been through this before, right? I've been in the hobby since I was 8. Like, I've been collecting. Like, when you see people come on board and you see things start to explode, like, there's two groups. There's the gatekeepers. We're here. We're the best. We know more, so we because we've been here and we're more important. And then you have the newer people that are coming in and sort of like, hey, we're joining up in a fun time. I want to be a part of this new explosion. And like Matt, or like you, where you're saying like, I just came back from these types of situations and I don't have those same feelings. I want to be a part of the community. David, you've had some really key experiences in the hobby too, because I think, unlike all of us, you've actually sort of brought a living from it in some cases, and you've had these experiences where you've been a part of this. Like, what's your take on this whole thing? Because I think you still do a lot of the baseball and basketball and football stuff too, don't you?
I do, and that's where I came into the hobby. Like you, I've been collecting for too many years that I want to remember. But I've been doing this for a long time, and I have primarily, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool set collector. I'm a baseball set collector. I've been called a dinosaur. I've been called a gatekeeper. I've been called everything in this hobby.
Right.
But that just happens when you've been in it long enough. I took probably about a 13-year hiatus. I left the hobby in about 95, just after the crushing baseball strike. I was done with baseball. I was done with everything related to baseball, as a lot of people from that time were. And, I drifted off into other things, but I had always been a professional wrestling fan. I was going to TV tapings they used to do the Canadian TV tapings at our local arena. So I would get to go monthly. And if you have a subscription to the WWE network for $9.95 or whatever it is now, if you go back to some of those old Maple Leaf Wrestling matches that are from Brantford, I'm on several of those matches, because there was a group of us that would always sit ringside, and all the seats were festival seating. So once those doors opened, it was a zoo to get there.
Just everybody streams in. And
it was you knew which ticket handler to go to because they were faster. And then you kind of knew the layout, so you could get to the ringside seats. You could be on the hard camera. You could be on the aisle. You could be and you figure all these things out. I was lucky enough to know some of the ushers, and I actually got to set up the ring a couple times. And I had all of my autographs from that time. They're gone now, but what I used to do was fold up an 8 by 11 a sheet of paper, and you'd fold it into 6s, and then you would keep it folded and refold it and just constantly hand it to the guys as they came in out of their rental cars. And we had there were so many fun stories. Like, we had the Iron Sheik came out to use a payphone. The only payphone in the arena was in this big glassed-in box, so it was like an aquarium. And here he is in his gear trying to make a phone call. Everybody else is just pounding on the window. So he's swearing at everyone behind the window trying to make this phone call. But I've been a wrestling fan since 84, 83, 84. And like I said, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool set collector, so that's where I came from. But when I came back in 2008 to card collecting, it had changed. It had gone through like a morph in those 13 years. Blogs had appeared, social media had appeared, and excuse me, it had evolved to more of a community, which is what I was looking for when I left, because it did feel so solo back then, because you had to meet people through you had to meet people through mailing lists, you had to meet people through hobby magazines and pen pals, and a lot of that stuff just didn't work out. But when I came back in 08, discovering blogs, discovering the community, excuse me, it was refreshing. It was new. And so when I came back, I was a newbie. I started asking all the questions that the people that hadn't left, that were from 2000, from 96, through the demise of Fleer, through all those changes. And I did come back as kind of like, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? And I didn't see them at the time as gatekeepers. I saw them at the time as people who knew more than me. And so, you had people explaining. Some people would explain nicely to you. And yeah, some people would just be, because you realize now, since I've been back, you realize they had gone through all that stuff. So it wasn't new to them. But I still, for the first few years, my main question to everybody was, well, why? Why is it this way? Why is it that way? But you slowly learn, and you figure it out. So well,
hold on a second. So you mentioned like you didn't really consider them gatekeepers, and like I realize that that's a loaded word in the hobby these days. But I think we've all sort of seen the way the sort of hobby has evolved over even since 2020, right? Like that whole thing, and you guys weigh in please as you feel. Like the hobby's evolved since 2020 dramatically across all of the different areas, and wrestling is really just kind of that last sort of bastion of dark corner of this universe that hasn't been explored. So like, I don't know if I like when I say they're gatekeepers, I'm saying like there's a group of people that say one thing about, hey, we want wrestling cards to be fun and community and wise and whatever, and then there's this group of people that are like, no, that's not, we can't keep this like in this little garden here, we've got to expand it out. Like, guys, jump in here. Like, do you like, I'm not saying that that's really what the focus of this topic was going to be, but as you were approaching this, like, do you feel like that's what sort of drove you to collect the way you do more, or was this just more of a personal decision? Go ahead. No. Anybody who wants to jump in.
What drove me to collect the way I do now is, as I collected more and more baseball. I'm sorry, it's really dry here. As I collected more and more baseball, I found that as case breaking started happening, a lot of the releases started being geared towards them and started gearing away from set collectors.
Makes sense.
So as that started happening, I found that there was less and less for me in baseball. So I started looking for other things. And I had always done, from back in the original 1985 WWF set, the 91 classic stuff. That's always been part of my collection. I started to do wrestling sets in the off season for baseball because I had nothing else to do.
Sure.
But as there became less and less baseball for me to focus on for sets, set collecting and wrestling was fairly easy because of it was a super compact set. You could do a set in a box. You didn't really have to worry too much. The distribution of the insert sets was really good. it was like how baseball used to be. And you could do most of those insert sets. So you could, aside from autographs and relics, you could pretty much do the base and insert master sets fairly easy. Took you about like maybe a month to complete if you really took your time. And so as those started getting done, I realized I had more and more gaps between when baseball started and when baseball ended.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And so hockey was a little bit there, but it just got nothing really piqued my interest. And so starting about probably 2020, 2021, I started really paying more attention to people that were collecting wrestling and how they were doing it differently. And it became, a lot of people were just super collectors. A lot of people started collecting individuals. And that seemed to me, when I saw collections like Adams, with the Becky Lynch stuff, that seemed to me like, okay, this seems like more of a challenge. This seems something that's more interesting to me.
Oh, it's definitely a challenge, my friend.
I know, as I've been finding out. Yes.
Matt, I'm coming for you, man. Later in this discussion, we're gonna go at it, dude.
We gotta get Dexter involved in this, because Dexter loves weighing in and fanning the flame.
I know he's Dexter's been poking us. Like, he's been saying, like, we need to get the cage match here. I told him I'd create like a match graphic for this. But I mean, like, yeah, it's funny because, like you mentioned, it's a challenge. I want to, just in the interest of time, I want to get moving here. But, like,
for sure,
we've got a lot of stuff going on that, there's people who collect their person, right? And if you're like Dave and you're an Alexa Bliss collector, you've got a lot of competition. If you're like me and you're a Becky Lynch collection, now you got a lot of competition. We got a lot of competition with a lot of money to spare. So, like, because we go back and forth a lot too. Chris, like, you as a Seth Rollins collector, he's one of those guys that over the last, let's say, I don't know, year and a half, or even more recently, since April with Nini coming on, has skyrocketed in value, because I think more people are coming in and not gravitating towards the usual hobby haunts. Like, do you feel like, what's been your experience there? Like, knowing that Seth is your guy, and I've seen the collection you just posted on Twitter today. Like, it's pretty impressive, man. Like, you've made a lot of headway in a short amount of time. I know Matt has too, but I'm going to purposely keep him from talking about it. Go ahead, Chris.
I appreciate that. So for me, basically, I think what it comes down, first off, for Seth Rollins, it just was that immediate perfect situation for my circumstances. As I said to you, I didn't keep up with wrestling for a good 8 years, 6 to 8 years. Right. But I would get together with my friends and watch the Big Four. And as I said, Seth Rollins was always that standout. So when I got into wrestling cards, I started just looking at his stuff. He was one of the first people I thought of, and I saw the price that was associated with that, and I was like, "This is perfect." I mean, this is
perfect.
Like,
right?
this is. I could go for the rare stuff. I could go for occasionally the one-on-one stuff. Like, this is ideal, and I actually really like the dude. So it just felt like the perfect circumstance with him. But I could say for me, honestly, the most fun part about wrestling collecting for me has been just fine-tuning that focus more and more and more and more, and just evolving and going different directions and following that path.
Completely
and just
agree.
Feeling
Absolutely.
like you getting this sense of like, I'm getting to that, like, where I want to get to, that, like, that destination. And I think starting out for me, it was looser. It was rip boxes, get cool hits of wrestlers that I liked, and it's number 5 or whatever, and I'll hang on to it because it's a cool card. And I would have different wrestlers, and I would have a variety of that. But then as I started to focus more on, like, Seth Rollins and the really rare stuff, I knew that I couldn't afford to continue to have everybody. So it started to become more about sparsing it down and just prioritizing my goals, and sort of, with the way my twisted OCD brain works, it's like I can't half collect a certain person, really. It's kind of like all or nothing. So you know, at some point I had to sort of draw the line and say, look, I could go this way and I could get, you know, some above average good cards of a variety of wrestlers, or I could hone it in on somebody that I actually really, really dig and I could watch progress throughout his career and continue to perform and know that his legacy is cemented at this point. It just felt like it was just the perfect direction for me to go, basically.
Yeah. And like Matt, you've made a lot of progress too, much to my chagrin, because you're also a Becky collector. You made a lot of progress too, like, but you kind of took it from like somebody identifying somebody that you saw immediately when you started watching wrestling again. I think Chris is doing the same thing here. Like, what sort of drove you to collect Becky? Like, what was sort of your whole thing there too? Like, give me some of the experience you had sort of coming on board.
Yeah, well, quickly, I'll mention too that I started off collecting Seth as well.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Matt.
Like, who's this guy creeping into?
Yeah, I mean, so when I got back into wrestling in February, I'm pretty sure the first segment I saw was Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins doing like an interview. I think it was like a KO show with the Alpha Academy, and when they were still teaming up. And like, what a good like segment to tune into for your first impression with those four guys, because it could have been bad. It could have been like some 24/7 title nonsense, and then maybe I never would have bought a single wrestling card if that is what I started watching. But
or you would have been an R-Truth collector.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
The other way, you know, who knows? But so yeah, Seth he's so awesome, and he's one of my favorite wrestlers, and I love watching him. And I was immediately drawn to him as well. Before I got back into wrestling, I heard the names Seth Rollins, Drew McIntyre, Roman Reigns, but honestly, I couldn't pick them out of a lineup. Like, I had no idea. Like, to me, they were all guys with long black hair. Like, I had no idea really who they were when I started watching. But
no shortage of those guys, yeah.
Yeah, but I knew who Becky Lynch was, even though I never really watched wrestling when she was coming up and she first came onto the scene. But I heard like saw through social media the whole like Nia Jax, her breaking her nose, and seeing images of that, and it's just sort of that stands out. And I knew nothing about Becky Lynch. I knew a little bit about the idea of like the women's revolution and that women's wrestling was not what it was back during the Attitude Era. So I remember seeing that, and just, again, I didn't tune in to watch wrestling, but I was like, that's cool. That's badass. You know, I get why people would like her. And then the whole man gimmick, I heard about that. And I just thought like, oh, of course that would be so over. Like, just the subtle psychology there is great. And I had Adam, I've heard you on, I think, other maybe YouTube videos talking about what drew you to Becky Lynch. And I had to laugh because when I heard you say what it was, I had just had a conversation like 2 or 3 days earlier with somebody. And I said like the same exact thing, which is that she just had this, and I put it in the same terms I think you used, but she just had this stone cold Steve Austin quality about her,
right?
Connection with the audience. And this is as I started watching a little bit more, it was just clear that she just had this undeniable connection with the audience. Even though when I started watching, she was in a heel gimmick, it was clear people wanted to root for her. I went to Raw, was in Chicago in March, and you know, you're supposed to boo the heel, but you know, most of the people were cheering.
So we're gonna do some fantasy booking here. Okay, I get it. We're going into the fantasy booking part of the show here. Everybody wants to cheer Becky.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what really, and so I, much like Chris, you know, when I got into collecting wrestling, I did a little bit of everything because I was excited that I knew what, you know, I collected a little bit of basketball and other sports. I knew what Prism was, and I thought it was cool. It was coming out for wrestling, and so. And you start looking at the prices of the singles. I mean, the prices of the wax, that's a whole nother story. We won't get into that. But the prices of the singles were like, man, I could collect like, you can get a Kevin Nash out of 25 Mojo for like $30. Like, I love Kevin Nash growing up. That's so awesome. And so I just started buying a bunch of different stuff and a little bit more of Seth Rollins, a little bit more of Becky, because those were like the people I really liked. I had to get a Chad Gable gold because, again, that was like the first segment I tuned into. I've never heard of Chad Gable, but he's awesome. I still love watching Chad Gable to this day. You know, it's like a broken record. He's the most underrated guy. But much like Chris, it became, I can't collect everybody. Like, you can't, if you want to, once you make that decision that, and if it's somebody like Becky who has a lot of other people, interested in her cards, or Roman, and you want to collect their top cards, it's hard to collect anything else. So that's kind of what led me to focusing on, if I'm going to collect Becky, and I thought about collecting, like, I had some Io Shirai cards. I had a nice little Io Shirai collection. And I love Io. I think she's a fantastic wrestler. I went back and watched like her Stardom stuff. It's just incredible. But, you know, I wanted to really collect the person who was at the top for me, my favorite wrestler. And I didn't want to kind of settle for, you know, somebody else. I was like, all right, that's my person. That's who I'm going to collect. You know, that's going to be my goal. We could talk about how player collecting helps setting your hobby goals. But that's kind of what led me down the path to collecting Becky. So I think it's a lot like a lot of people get into collecting anything, but cards in particular, they evolve, and your collection evolves, and it doesn't ever have to stop evolving. You know, and I think too, this might be a tricky thing for player collectors, but you know, there's no shame in saying, I'm going to collect somebody else now, or maybe I'll collect, like, you know, pick up some cards here or there. Like, I feel people, they box themselves in. You know, it's okay to keep evolving your collection. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now.
I've been trying to work on a side PC for Sasha. We'll see how it goes. I mean, because starting a side PC on somebody that is at a higher price tier than the person I mainly PC might not be the wisest idea. So we'll see how it goes. But you know, I agree with you. It doesn't hurt to sometimes veer off track a little bit, just to, you know, when things are at a low, when you have a little bit of a low period.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're right. I think like the focus, I was talking with at those back pages, one of our favorite tweeters from the baseball side of things about focus a couple of days ago. And I was like, you know, I used to buy a bunch of like these cards and I would have them, but they would always get farmed out to fund other cards that I was buying for my main PC. So I stopped buying them. Like, I just didn't do that anymore because they were always gone. Like, I had a bunch of Stone Cold stuff. I had some Rock stuff. I had some Roman Reigns stuff. It's all gone because I've had to spend, you know, that money on stuff that I was buying here. David, like, you're in, like, while we all have a triple threat match here to beat each other up about Seth and Becky, like, you're kind of in another sort of competitive space with Alexa. Like, what has that competition done to your sort of PC? Because I've seen you've gotten like a Color Blast, you've gotten a few major cards as well as a lot of the other stuff. Like, but you're going up against some of the toughest competition in the hobby. What's been your experience?
Well, I think, like you said, it's a very competitive, but the way I look at it, it's friendly competitive. Unlike where I've seen some really toxic competitiveness in hockey, I've seen it in baseball, I've seen it in others, but it seems in this one, even though you are competing with one another, you still have the fellow collectors that will point you in a direction. If you're looking for a certain something. But the one thing that collecting Alexa Bliss has done for me, because I am I collect a certain segment. So when it comes to autographs, her autograph has deteriorated so much that 2017 to 2019.
I think we're all in that same boat. Like,
exactly.
Like every single one of us are in that same boat.
I stick to her 17 to 19 autographs because, you know, it was a workload she could handle. It was still a nice signature. And, you know, it's not like now where she's just being given hundreds of cards every other week to sign and get them out. Yeah. And I understand it. But that era of the signature is what I like of hers, and I like on card. I'm not a fan of stickers, so there's a lot of gimmicky things that I don't like. But the one shift in my thinking for this since collecting Alexis and collecting the rarer stuff, like is I jump on things now right away. There's no such thing, and I've seen the discussions there's no such thing to me as overpaying for a card, because if I can't overpay for a card because it's either in my price range or it's out of my price range. I will never spend money on a card I don't have. I will reluctantly but gladly waive bye-bye to cards that aren't in my price range, which is what happened with the black 1 of 1. I was in that thing until about 40 minutes left in the auction, and I had to bow out.
What did it go for?
Yeah.
It ended up for almost 38.
Yeah, it was a nice price. It was a nice price on that.
It was a decent price, but once again, and that's what I guess collecting this too has taught me. It's taught me moderation. It's taught me restraint. It's taught me all of these things that, I know I can't spend out of my price range, so I won't, but I'm not averse to paying what I think is fair to get the card, because I know there's some that will never come up. Like, sure, my heart was in my throat when I bought the gold shimmer, but secondly was it wasn't out of my price range, and I knew that if I didn't get it, I would probably never see another one.
What did that one go for, if you don't mind me asking?
I honestly I can't remember what I paid for it.
That and the black are the only ones that I have left. I'm not gonna get the black.
I'm down to the gold shimmer too.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and it was I'm down to the black, the gold out of 10, and then the lucky envelope, which nobody's ever gonna see.
Yeah, forget that. But I was able to get the second one. I was able to get the second one. You got lucky because Props Team got your guy out of all of those. It's interesting because no, I know, man. Like, listen, it's one of those things where, like, sometimes you just get lucky, and it's like I've told my buddies a number of times, like, it's never just like one card that pops up. It's always like 5 in a row. So like you're never gonna
absolutely.
Get
and that's like, the other thing I've run into is I was like, okay, I'm gonna I'm trying to budget. I'll say, okay, I'm gonna get this many cards this month, but of course, the very first rainbow I go for, 99% of the rainbows showed up in like 2 weeks. Right. So I was like, I got to get on this now, or I ain't getting it.
Yeah. That's interesting because I think, like, we've all had our battles, and I know I've done my fair share of rainbow chasing too, but like some of these cards are designed to make people like us uncomfortable, and it's just like sure. I really hate that that's what it's come to, because I don't think it was as much like that in Topps, but it's like with Panini it's definitely been much more uncomfortable because they're purposely pitting people against each other, whether it's the impeccable numbers cards or the different parts of these rainbows, right? So like, yeah, it's like I don't get why I put myself through this torture.
I feel like it's only just begun too. You know what I mean? I feel like it's gonna go up. It's gonna happen.
I mean, do you guys think like this is the way people collect because of the money factor? Like, is this really what's driving it? Is like, we know that if we really sort of spread ourselves out the way we wanted to, we would never be able to be happy? Or like, what do you guys think? Like, why do people choose this?
Well, for me, when I started going for the rainbows, for me, it was an affordability factor, because I was like, okay, this is, I looked at some of the other cards, and I see some of the people that try and collect rainbows in Topps flagship, or I see people that try and collect rainbows in basketball and those cards are just like you're like, I just can't compete with that. There's a handful of guys, but when I started looking at the price of these cards, and it took me a little while, but I was even adverse to, for me, a lot of money was, throwing $90 on a card, or,
it's a slippery slope.
I know, but
once you start spending, you don't get the rush until you spend above that.
And like I said to you, once I broke the 3-figure barrier, I was like, it's not that bad. It's like jumping into a swimming pool. You're like, oh, that's going to be cold, man. That's going to be cold. And you jump in. Oh, you're like, this is great. And then so now like your threshold keeps going up, but
it's all about that rush. It's all about that rush.
But metering that with a comfort level, and I think that's what's allowed me to evolve even in other sports. Like, so now, I look at Shohei Ohtani cards, and I'm not so skittish to say, okay, that's a decent price for that card, because I'm starting to get more of a mindset of like, what? Yeah, baseball collecting so much more. That card's out of 25. There are so many Ohtani.
Matt's making uncomfortable faces here. I feel like he's.
But you're like there's so many Ohtani collectors, so that card's out there. I better grab it, because once they're done, there's only going to be 30% of that print run left.
Yeah, Matt, I want to hear your feedback here, because you look like you're about to keel over.
No, well, I'll tell you what I do. Whenever I feel bad about how much I paid for a card, I'll just go on Card Ladder and look at how much like Tom Brady cards go for,
for sure,
like the latest hot rookie in NBA, and I'm like, well, I got a deal then,
Yeah.
And that it's funny how that works though, because what did attract me to the wrestling cards was that they were so affordable compared to other sports. And it was like I said, starts with paying $30 for a Kevin Nash, and then it evolves. But I mean, it's not, there is a rush to getting a big card, right? It's not so much the dollars spent on it. It's the reason why Panini makes, and anyone makes, one of ones or out of fives or out of tens and things like that, which is that you own something that very few other people own, or you own the only copy, and it's what makes your collection unique, right? You have something that you could say someone else doesn't have, and that could be in it makes you feel good about your own collection. Your collection is unique. You look at it and you say like, okay, this is, something I have that's special. You could look at it from a competitive aspect, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more, and we have touched on that. I think competition is totally fine. It's totally fine to look at however you collect, including super collecting, whether, there's a competitive angle to it, and that's part of the fun for you. I think that's totally fine. As long as you keep some perspective and keep it fun. They're just trading cards, or just wrestling cards.
For sure.
And
it's a lot of money.
The dark forest path there, my friend. It's just wrestling cards.
It's just wrestling cards. And it's supposed to be fun at the end of the day. And yes, it can be a lot of money, but that money turns into then just a card. And so you've got to.
I think that's why we're all here, man. It's all about that fun factor. I think that's what's driving a lot of this. And I'm like, you hearing you guys speak it, like you guys are explaining a lot of the same feelings that I have. It's interesting, like, to talk with other super collectors, because there's so many of them, right? Like, if you go on Facebook, and I know some of you have been on there, some of you are on Twitter only, like, you see super collecting is really the preferred method. So like, you see a lot of these people have these similar feelings. Like, and you mentioned the competition. Absolutely. Like, friendly competition within, like, I've been friends with who I think has one of the best Becky collections in the world. It's not me, believe it or not. And like, it's crazy to sort of have that relationship, that friendly relationship. Matt and I talk all the time, even though we're in direct competition with each other all over the place. Like, and Chris, like, I've seen kind of the way that you've approached some of the things within your collection, specifically around like, you're going to get what you like and only what you like. Do you have something like, hey, I'm just not buying that. I don't collect that. For me, it's the UK stuff. I don't buy any of the Topps UK stuff. Like, I just hate it. Chris, is there anything that you just completely stay away from?
Yeah. Nothing off the top of my head that I could. There's that period in like 2017, 2018, where some of the cards are touch and go for me. Like, there's some undisputed cards that I love, and then there's some that I'm like, on. And I think that's where I kind of like philosophically questioned like what it means to be a super collector. Because I'm definitely not the type of person that's like, Seth Rollins' name is on it, so I need it. It's very much. Right. The aesthetic design matters just as much to me. And I feel like I caved, but I was one of the few people that didn't gravitate to Impeccable right away, partially because it's something that highlights signatures, and Seth's signature is ass, as we know. So
we're all in that boat. Yep, we're all in that boat.
And I had this thing with the whole number scheme being this potentially arbitrary number where, for example, when Seth Rollins goes to the next WrestleMania, that number is going to go up. Maybe Impeccable will come out with another set and it'll have 12 on it, and then people will continue to collect it. But for me, it was like, I don't know how I feel about that. I ended up getting the championship debut one because that was a constant number. That's not going to change.
You're not the only person to say this approach. It's really interesting.
I feel like everybody's universally loved Impeccable, and I was kind of like, I'm waiting for National Treasures.
I loved it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I've come around to it. I mean, I prefer those patch auto cards really more than anything.
This is one of the downsides, though, of collecting. Chris, you highlight is the lull. You get a little bored.
Mm-hmm.
Buying things,
absolutely,
and something maybe you actually didn't love.
Yep.
You come around to, and maybe you do legit come around to it. I mean, I love those cards, so I wouldn't be surprised if
I've come around to it. Yeah,
they're fantastic, especially in person. I mean, they're great. Just the craftsmanship on those are great. But this is what happens: is if you only collect one person, and Panini's not releasing a set every single month, you get into this lull, and you're like, wow, I haven't bought anything all this month. Maybe I'll go back and add this to my collection here or there. But I'm like you, right. I don't buy every single Becky card. For the top stuff from like 2016, 2017, 2018, like I really only buy the undisputed cards. I like those cards, and I don't buy the other top stuff.
I don't think I'll ever come around to Revolution.
Okay, that's a unique take. Let's see. Okay.
I was like that too initially. It took me a while to come around to Revolution until I got a Galactic, and then that changed my mind on the Galactics. So Becky's got 4 of them.
Awesome.
I'll probably only have 4, Revolution cards, but you come around.
I'm not a huge fan of Revolution either.
Coming from basketball, I was familiar with Revolution. I was familiar with Galactics, and I thought that would be like, that's what's been my favorite. And I don't want to go without saying this because this is an important point to me, is that's what's been my favorite part of Panini taking over these cards is, like I said, I came from other sports. So I always lusted over these zebra stripe cards and these different awesome select cards. Yeah. But they were, if I wanted my player, it probably was out of my price range. So to now be able to get my number one guy with that card design for affordable price, it's like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same way, and that's why I love the Galactics so much, because they're a hobby standard, right? Exactly. So, like, if you think, and like, I'm not a huge fan of Revolution. I think the things about the set that appeal to me are the same that Matt was just talking about. Like, I like certain aspects of it. Overall, the set is kind of like, but like those hobby standards impact me in WWE now much more than I ever expected they would. Like, I know David and I were talking about the color blasts for a while. Like, I never really gravitated towards those in the stick and ball sports, but here, like, I had to have that card. So it was like, it's crazy, like, how much that impacts me. And Chris, you're 100%.
Yeah, it's been my favorite part of the whole Panini takeover so far.
Yeah, so I think for me too.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying. I think for me too, when it comes to, and I've noticed this in more of the recent sets, and I'm kind of glad she's done with the character. But for me, a lot of the enjoyment of the newer stuff with Alexa is photo selection, and her photo selection, for whatever reason, it's been so stale since she did Dark Alexa. It's like they had 5 stock photos that they could use.
Right.
But then you see stuff like what Topps UK did. They had different photo selection, and their cards were so much better. They, Topps and Panini seem to have passed right over the Firefly Funhouse Alexa, and they just went to Dark Alexa. And you've got all of those in the UK now. So those were nice ones. And then, of course, no one, for whatever reason, has touched WrestleMania Alexa, which is the other one that I'm waiting for, the Black Oil Alexa.
Yeah, that's an interesting photo. That was all over everywhere. Like, I think, and just like kind of, I know we only have a few minutes left here, so I want to hit on this too. Like, how do you expect this? Like, as the Panini license continues to expand, whether that's through Fanatics, if that's eventually where that goes, or in Panini proper, eventually it goes back to Topps in 2026. Like, how are you guys thinking about 2023 and 2024 as you're looking at your collections? Because I think we're all in agreement, like, we can't chase everything as much as we would like to. Like, for me, I had said I avoid the Topps UK stuff. I really like to avoid the Divas stuff too. That's just kind of weird to me. But like the switching into this gear of, like, Panini's here for a long time, and they literally know how to bait collectors. This is a vanity
For sure.
laden community. Like, we all want to look as good as possible. With our collection, we want to be the best. Like, I think that's an interesting sort of dichotomy between, do we pour everything in now, knowing that, you know, it's going to be this marathon, not a sprint? Like, I'm curious kind of how you guys are approaching that, Matt or Chris or David. Like, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that I think it's all, like I said, I think it's only just begun. I think this is just my opinion, I could be wrong in the matter, but I would imagine that for a distributor to take on new products in a whole other realm from where they're generally producing cards, they, like anybody else, have to kind of find their footing. So I think that there was a good element of using, you know, obviously their best educated decision-making process, but I think that there was a little bit of a trial involved in this year, figuring out how things work. I mean, I would imagine that in their wildest dreams, they wouldn't expect there to be some sort of massive backlash that has come about throughout this year to them just producing cards. I could be wrong, but to me, it was completely surprising. But going forward, I think
I don't know if that's warranted though. Like, I think it's a certain vocal group of people.
Yeah,
But I think overall, like, the feedback, like, if you go outside of wrestling Twitter, I think the feedback has been generally positive. I think there's been some bitterness around pricing and stuff like that, but that's happened all over the hobby.
Yeah.
But, like, do you think, like, if as Panini's going and as Panini continues to churn out year 2, year 3 of Prism, year 2 and year 3 of Select, like, do you see yourself continuing to go the same direction you've been going, or are you looking to? Do you think that it's going to be too hard to sustain?
That's hard to say. I'm going to try my best. I mean, I know what my parameters are. I like the direction they're going. I think it's only going to get better. I think Immaculate looks absolutely incredible. I mean, I've gone from looking at the premium products and then seeing the next premium product and saying, well, that's only going to be better. And then seeing the next one. So that to me is, you know, that's a sign of a positive direction that we're heading in. And I think that now that Panini has that first year under their belt with wrestling, they're gonna know how to approach it a little bit better in both terms of what the collectors are looking for, as well as where the price points should be falling. You know, as for Prism, you know, that's obviously the first one that comes to mind. We know the values of these low numbered singles, but we also know what happened, the whole drama surrounding the wax prices. Exactly. You know, that's going to be under a microscope, and as it should be, because Prism is their product. That's their key product. And
that's the flagship brand.
Yeah. So I think that I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be interesting, and I think it's going to pick up momentum big time, even more than it has already.
Yeah. I think the learning curve was across the hobby this year. I think Panini learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Collectors learned a lot. I like what Panini did. I like the expansion of the rosters. I like the expansion of the personalities they put in the set. I like the fact that, you know, we're seeing people in sets that haven't been in top sets in years, whether it was deals, whether it was cool. Whatever. But, you know, seeing all these new people coming into the set, that's exciting to me. I like the predictability of Panini. The one thing I really don't is I cannot stand how Top seems so disorganized when it comes to doing anything. I mean, you know, it seems like no one is driving the bus over there. Whereas with Panini, you know, they're almost like the opposite pendulum swing. They are in such a, I don't want to call it a rut, but they are so focused on putting out what they put out, how they put it out, designing it, laying it out, and you know, it's not quite cookie cutter, but it's almost there. And so you know what you're getting, you know what to expect, you know what's going to be in there, with the occasional surprise.
Yeah.
So, you know, and with the three companies, not to leave Upper Deck alone. Upper Deck is like a mixture of the two. Upper Deck knows what they're doing, but then they're like, well, let's just really throw in something weird that nobody knows we're going to do. We're not going to tell anybody about it. They're going to find out about it 8 months down the line, and that's going to be cool because it makes no sense. But I like the predictability of Panini. I like knowing what I'm going to get. So I know what to expect from what they're doing with Prism now. So going into 2023's Prism, I'm going to be better prepared for what I need to do. Whereas, like, you know, like before,
we all
like,
are. I think we all are. Yeah.
Even with Select, and you know, like with the golds and all that stuff, you know, that well's going to dry up real quick. So for me, like, that's what I was saying earlier, back to touch back on what I said. I learned not to hum and haw, and learn not to hesitate. It's like when you see something, it's in your price range, go for it. Don't try and squeeze a nickel out of a stone. Just go for it.
Yeah. So just to kind of like wrap this up, as we're sort of thinking about, okay, I liked what you were saying, Chris, about there's always the next, and the next always seems better. The recency bias kind of plays into it a little bit, but like, I remember seeing the sell sheet for Prism. I was like, wow, this looks awesome. I remember seeing the sell sheet for Select. I'm like, wow, they've really done a good job bringing this over from football. Impeccable was really kind of the first like WWE set that I was like, they built this on their own and it looks really, really damn good. And then when we see Immaculate release today, which is another port from the previous sports, but they're bringing in elements from other sets that we've come to love in the stick and ball sports. Like, for me, I see the trajectory sort of continuing to snowball. And eventually we're going to get to Eminence. We're going to get to Flawless. We're going to get to some of these things. I feel like I'm excited for that because I get to see that come to a sport that I've been so invested in. But I also see that it's going to mean a lot of change for a lot of people who are probably used to your point, David, of being at the front of the line and now are probably closer to the middle or back. Like, and that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. And I think that that's where some of that backlash that you were talking about, Chris, where it was coming from, right? It's like, well, you've got these people that are like bitter over the fact that, you know, hey, this is changing. It is making things a little bit more unachievable. It is making things more difficult to continue. And I identify with it because I went through a lot of that myself. Like, I never thought I'd be able to get what I've got. But you make sacrifices and you find ways to be resourceful, and you make friends in the hobby, like to help sort of, you know, bridge those gaps. Matt, like, as you've sort of thinking about like, okay, I know right now that, you know, I'm seen as like the guy for this person, Becky, Alexa, Seth Rollins, wherever. Like, do you feel like there's that expectation that people have of you to get the next best thing? Like, do you feel like there's like this drive to continue to be the best?
Yeah, there's like that with the super collecting, like I said, you get that competitive aspect to it, and then people do egg you on. Like on Twitter, we had somebody reaching out and saying, it's gonna be a bloodbath. And I'll say it's really, first of all, I mean, personally for me, as far as competing with, you know, trying to build my collection, there is no competition. Like, you have the best, in my opinion, you have the best Becky Lynch collection in the galaxy. I'm not even
not necessary for this.
I'm not even catching that, you know. And so, and you know, so, and the one thing I will say, and this is not a negative about super collecting if you're going to decide to super collect, but it's something that I never agreed with, really, naturally, being the newbie to the block. It's not surprising I don't agree with this, but the idea that a card belongs in a certain collection, or that somebody's entitled to a certain card. Because you hear
For
that
sure.
a lot.
Great point. Yeah.
You don't hear that from the people actually collecting them, because most people aren't. They're not going to be like, "Oh, that's my card. I
We're not
deserve that."
territorial with it.
Nobody says that. Yeah. But other people will, and not like in a mean-spirited way. They'll just say, "Oh, yeah, I'm glad that collection went to the right home or went to the right person. It really belongs to you."
It's a good
And they
point.
don't mean it in a bad way. But I never felt that way at all. I mean, I don't feel like, a one-of-one comes out like, yeah, I want the card. I'd love to have it. Do I think it belongs in my collection, your
Right.
collection, any other Big Becky collection? No, not necessarily. If it sold to somebody, it was their first, like if it was a one-on-one and it was their first Becky Lynch card they ever bought, like I'd be sad I lost out on the card, but I wouldn't be sad it went to somebody who doesn't have like this big super collection. As long as they like Becky and they're buying the card because they enjoy the card and they're not like flipping it or investing in it. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but I wouldn't feel
That's a
bad.
good
I'd be like,
point. Yeah.
awesome, you got a great card, and like that, if you're gonna start a big Becky super collection, you got a great start. If that's the only card you want because you've got a one-of-one or whatever it is, awesome. Like I think that's great. So I don't, when I look at things coming out, I don't look at it like I have to own that card or it belongs in my collection or anything else. I am super excited for all the stuff that's coming out from Panini, not just new sets we may be getting, but second year Prism Select with different parallels, because there was, I think Adam, you've mentioned
There's so much more to come. Yeah.
The Select we got, it's crazy to think like that was such a chase. There were so many cards and so many parallels, and when you compare it to other sports,
it's like a third of the size. Yeah.
There's so many different. When you look at NBA, there's snake skin and dragon scale. I'm like, oh man, that would be sweet to have in WWE. So I look forward to that. And that's what keeps the chase going. I think you got to keep perspective, though. You can't. You and I know you can't have every one-of-one. It just
no.
Unless you're collecting somebody like, not to pick on this, like Angelo Dawkins, who just you maybe don't have as much demand there. And if you had enough, a reasonable sized budget, yeah, you probably could get every Angelo Dawkins one-of-one. The harder part is actually just tracking them down, but actually buying them might not be as difficult.
Sure.
But if you collect somebody like Roman or you collect somebody like Cody Rhodes and you decide that that's going to be your person, unless you've got a budget approaching $100,000, you've got to accept that you can't get every one-of-one that comes across your board. It's not going to happen. And
it's a great point. It's a great point. I remember, and it's funny because I remember when you got the black ringside, I got a bunch of messages saying like, you mad, bro? I'm just like, dude, like, no, like, it's not the way this works. Like, I remember tweeting out and being like, hey, I'm really happy you got this. I'm really happy that he got it for the price he got it for, because it makes everything more sort of chase worthy. Right. And people were like, wow, I never expected that to come out. Like, listen, I'm not this guy that is completely incapable of being happy for other people. Like, I was never in at the price that it was starting at, let alone where it ended at. So for him to get it there and add it to this collection that's been growing and adding to the competition, like that's the next best thing that can happen if I'm not the one that's getting it, right? So, but I agree with you. Like, this whole thing, like, this deserves to be in your collection. Like, I hear that so much, and it just drives me to make uncomfortable decisions in my collecting as a result of it. But
there's that aspect of it too, because then you hear that and you're like, well, maybe it does belong in my collection.
Maybe.
Yeah. You'd really
maybe I need a T-shirt of this card. Yeah, maybe I should just have T-shirts made and like a hat and everything. I could go full on, just dress as that card for Halloween. Yeah. All right. So to wrap this up, so like, great discussion, guys. Thank you so much. To wrap this up, last question here. All right, let's put the cash on the table. Everybody's got unlimited budget. What is that one card for your super collection, your player collection, whatever you want to call it? What is that one card you are still looking to get? And we'll go around and sort of, and we'll end that way, because I think it's a good way to sort of put a cherry on this. David, you want to start, my man? Go right ahead.
Honest to God, I'm putting money away, because if it ever comes back to market, I am not sealing trying to get that Black Prism 101.
All right. That's a good choice. And where can they find you? Just and give them your contact info one more time, just so we can.
If they ever want to hit me up on Twitter at LongFlyBall and give me a good deal on that card, I will definitely thank them,
He's
and
your man.
I will definitely make it worth their while.
All right, and Chris, go ahead, my friend.
Well, I've yet to get one single measly select one of one so far, unlike you lucky guys. So one of those would be nice. But if I had to pick, and it's not even technically the most expensive option I could get, but my favorite card of sets, I've told you before, Adam, that I haven't seen. I know Card Pros had it at one point and sold it, is the Transcendent Super.
Yep.
That's my favorite card. So.
And where can they reach you too? Just so we're wrapping this up and sort of giving our sign-offs at the same time here.
Sure. Twitter's probably the easiest way. Chris_Brancato, Brancato.
Awesome. And Matthew, my friend, my mortal enemy, what's your grail here that you're still searching out?
Oh man, I'm kind of showing you my hand here. I don't know.
Yeah, you are. That's the whole point of having you on this.
You're okay.
That was the point of the.
We're just props and all this. Yeah. We're just like setup guys for this.
This will never actually air. This will never be on YouTube or anything. This is all just going into the research file.
Exactly.
Okay, you could find me on Twitter. I'm just WWEPrizm. On Instagram, it's WWEPrizmCollector. The one card, Adam, you're not going to like my answer. It is the 2020 Chrome Superfractor. I got a feeling that's your answer too. Yep. That would be my number one. I'll give you an answer you might like, though. If you were talking about things that aren't available, it would be the 2020 Chrome, the image variation. That would be my top card. But you own that card, so at least you know.
I have the Super.
If you ever needed to sell that card, you've got a buyer right here.
I have the set Super of that card, actually.
That's I was able to
saw that on your video. That's an insane card.
That was the first Super I got, and I think it was through your buddy Ben. Actually, it was on eBay before I knew who he was.
That's an awesome card, man. I love the Superfractors, and that's always been my thing. Like my collection, like I have 5 of them. I have the Transcendent Superfractor. I have the 2020 and 2021 Chrome Superfractors. I am missing the one that he said, and we will go to the mat on that one if it ever comes up. And I'm hoping that if I ever do die suddenly, that my wife sells it to you for not the price I told her I paid for it. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that the main challenge for me is always that, like, when you're at a position, like if you go back through Topps, right? I think I have every Topps like major card that is above 5 or above 101, right? So like I'm really down to the nitty gritty here. But the Panini stuff has brought this whole new world, and I think we've even seen like recently the finest Superfractor autograph, which is one of the only pack pulled ones that you can get. Like that one just got pulled. Like there's still some stuff out there, especially for all of us, right? That we're always looking for that next sort of really cool sort of thing to add to our collection, and Panini just keeps turning them out. Topps turns them out, Upper Deck, whatever. So there's always going to be something next. Like for me, like I've always gravitated towards the man. Like that's always been Becky Lynch for me. Like the Big Times Becks, I loved that at the end. Like I think it really grew on me, and I love a lot of the photography that came out of it because she really just went full on into the gimmick. But for me, I still am looking for stuff from like Transcendent 2019, like the gold 101 there still hasn't. It was pulled in a break and it's probably buried in a drawer somewhere. Like the red 101 from 2020 to complete my rainbow, like that's gone somewhere. Like I know who has the 2021 red. He's not selling it. So I mean, like those are the types of things that just keep me up at night. And these finest Superfractors, the Chrome Superfractors, like continuing my quest to get those Superfractors in house. At least I have the one that I was like. Transcendent is my top set. Like that's my game. And like the Transcendent Superfractors, I think are the best WWE cards ever made. And so I was happy to get that one. But for me, it's probably somewhere in those Transcendent 101s and other one-on-ones that are coming from like Immaculate. We're going to see the inscriptions. Like, I love unique content like that. I love when they sign stuff that's cool, and whether it's the logos or the, you know, stuff that might be coming from National Treasures and Chronicles about to release. Like, I wish I could just narrow it down to one card. And I'm sorry for putting you guys in that spot and then completely just avoided the question myself. That's the beauty of being the host. But it was wonderful to have you guys on, and I love having these discussions and adding new voices. I hope you guys had fun. It was great to hear kind of your takes on things and sort of how it either jives or doesn't jive with sort of what my expectations are. But, you know, that's the beauty of why we do these. And I think as we continue down these paths and more voices are added to the discussion, you're going to start to see a lot more sort of this type of stuff where you have these different perspectives. You have what Matt is saying about, hey, I don't want people to say this deserves in your collection, or what Chris is saying about stuff that has to do with what's coming and how he approaches it, or what Dave is saying about the different aspects of him leading up to joining this and being in the crowd at the Maple Leaf Wrestling. That's awesome. So like, those are the types of things like I hope to bring to more of these videos. I love having these conversations. Usually we have them as we're sort of sitting around as we're ripping boxes in card shops, but they never make it on YouTube. This one won't either, because I was just doing this to set Matt up. But like but overall, like, these are the types of things I hope people get enjoyment on. I think we've been talking now for about an hour, so you know, I hope you've made it this far. You can find me at WWE Gelman on Instagram, or at SC Uncensored on Twitter, and we can visit my website www.sportscardsuncensored.com. But yeah, follow all of us. Follow all the people that are part of these discussions. Get to hear their voices, because I think they add so much to the discussion. And so it's been great to have all of you guys on, and thanks again. We'll hopefully be able to do this again soon. So thanks again, guys. Appreciate it.